Hey there, listeners. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to the second episode. Today, we're diving into a question that many English learners ask. Why can I understand English, but I can't speak it fluently?
It's such a frustrating feeling, right? You watch English movies, listen to podcasts, and maybe even read books, and it seems like you understand everything. But when it comes to speaking, it's a whole different story.
Totally. You might even have a solid vocabulary, but when it's time to say something in English, your mind goes blank or you get stuck on the words. So, what's going on? Why is there this gap between understanding and speaking?
Well, that's what we're going to explore today. And trust us, if you're struggling with this, you're not alone. In fact, it's a common experience for language learners all over the world. So, we'll break it down and look at why this happens and, more importantly, what you can do about it.
Exactly. We'll cover several factors that contribute to this challenge. From your vocabulary to the psychological barriers we all face when speaking a new language, we've got you covered. So let's dive in.
All right, let's start with a topic that might seem a little technical at first, but is super important. The difference between passive and active vocabulary.
Okay, so let's break it down. You've probably heard of passive vocabulary and active vocabulary, but what does that really mean?
Great question. So, passive vocabulary is all the words you understand when you read, hear, or listen to them in context. It's like your mental dictionary of words you can recognize, even if you don't necessarily use them in your own speech.
Exactly. For example, if you're reading an article or watching a movie in English and you understand what the speaker is saying, but when it comes to speaking, you might not be able to recall the word right away or use it in your sentence.
Right. It's almost like these words are locked in your mind. You recognize them, but you don't have immediate access to them when you want to speak.
Now, on the other hand, active vocabulary is made up of the words you're able to use freely and confidently in your own speech. These are words you're comfortable saying out loud because you've practiced using them.
Think about when you're talking to a friend in English and you use the words you know best, words you've probably used in conversations a lot. These are the words that come naturally. They don't require much thought.
So, why is it that we can recognize so many words but struggle to speak them? Well, the key is that passive vocabulary is like the foundation, but active vocabulary is what you need to actually express yourself fluently.
Exactly. And here's the catch. Just because you have a large passive vocabulary doesn't mean you can automatically use those words in conversation. You need practice to activate them.
Think of passive vocabulary as being stored in your brain, but active vocabulary is when you actually take those words and use them in real situations.
So, for a lot of learners, they might hear or read something in English and understand it perfectly. But when it comes to speaking, they struggle because they haven't had enough practice using those words actively.
This is where the challenge lies. How do you move those words from passive to active? And that's what we're going to explore in the next segment.
Right. And this is a huge part of why speaking fluently takes time. It's not just about learning more words, but about learning how to use them comfortably in conversations.
So, now that we understand the difference between passive and active vocabulary, the next big question is, how do we actually activate our vocabulary?
Exactly. It's one thing to recognize a word, but it's another to be able to speak it in the right context, confidently and naturally.
And a big part of that comes down to confidence, which we're going to talk about next. Why is it that even when we know the words, we still struggle to speak? Spoiler alert, it's all in your mindset.
Stay tuned, because in the next section, we'll be diving into why confidence plays such a huge role in speaking fluently and how you can build it. So, now that we've explored the difference between passive and active vocabulary, let's move on to a key factor in speaking fluently, confidence. It's one of the most common barriers learners face, right, Sophie?
Absolutely. Confidence is huge. You might know the words, you might have a solid understanding of grammar, and yet, when you're in a conversation, your brain just freezes. You can't seem to get the words out.
Exactly. And a lot of people don't realize that confidence plays a massive role in fluency. It's not just about knowing words, but about being brave enough to speak them.
And that's why sometimes even advanced learners struggle with speaking fluently. They understand everything perfectly, but when it's their turn to speak, they hesitate. Or worse, they feel anxious about making a mistake.
Right, and here's the thing. When you're not confident, your brain tends to overthink things. You start worrying about pronunciation, grammar, whether you'll say something wrong, and that's when fluency gets blocked.
Exactly. Your mind starts to focus more on avoiding mistakes than actually communicating. And that makes you more likely to freeze up, stutter, or take too long to find the right word.
So how do we build this confidence? Well, first, we need to realize that making mistakes is part of the process. A lot of learners get stuck because they fear judgment or the idea of making a mistake in front of others.
And that fear is totally normal. I've felt it, and I'm sure many of you have too. But here's the secret. You need to embrace mistakes, not fear them. Every mistake is an opportunity to improve.
Absolutely. In fact, the more mistakes you make, the faster you'll learn. It's through those errors that your brain makes new connections and improves. Mistakes are a sign you're actually trying to speak, and that's how you grow your active vocabulary.
Exactly, Nathan. And here's a little tip. Try to normalize mistakes. Every time you say something wrong, just correct yourself, laugh it off, and move on. The more comfortable you get with making errors, the more confident you'll become in speaking.
Right, and speaking out loud, even when you're alone, is a great way to build that confidence. A lot of learners avoid speaking because they feel like they don't sound perfect. But guess what? No one speaks perfectly all the time, not even native speakers.
That's so true. So, try not to compare yourself to others. Focus on progress, not perfection. And the more you practice speaking, the easier it gets. You'll start to feel more comfortable and less self-conscious.
It's all about practice. And it's not just about speaking with others. Speaking to yourself, even if it's just repeating what you hear in a podcast or movie, can also help you become more comfortable with pronunciation and sentence structure. This helps activate your vocabulary and boosts your confidence.
Another great practice is finding a language partner or tutor to practice with. Having regular conversations with someone will give you real-life speaking experience, and you'll get used to thinking in English without worrying too much about being perfect.
And don't forget, confidence isn't built overnight. It's a gradual process. But every time you speak, even if it's just a few words or a short sentence, you're building that confidence muscle.
And as you build confidence, you'll notice a difference in how fluid and natural your speech becomes. You'll stop overthinking and just focus on communicating, which is the ultimate goal.
So, to summarize, confidence is key to unlocking fluency. Start by embracing mistakes, practicing regularly, and focusing on communicating, not perfection. Remember, the more you speak, the more confident you'll feel, and the easier it'll become to speak fluently.
And with confidence, you'll begin to bridge the gap between understanding English and speaking it smoothly. So now that we've tackled the confidence piece, let's move on to another crucial factor in speaking fluently: the fear of making mistakes.
You've probably heard us mention mistakes a couple of times by now. And that's because they're such a big part of the process when learning a language.
Exactly. But there's a reason many learners are so afraid of making them. The fear of mistakes can hold us back from speaking, even if we're confident.
So, in the next section, let's dive deeper into why this fear exists and how we can overcome it, so we can become more confident speakers.
All right, so now that we've discussed confidence, let's tackle another big issue many learners face: the fear of making mistakes. This is often what holds people back from speaking English freely, even when they know the words.
Exactly. You've probably heard yourself saying, "What if I say something wrong?" Or, what if they don't understand me? These thoughts can be paralyzing, and they make speaking more difficult than it has to be.
Right.
The fear of making mistakes is completely normal, but it can get in the way of your progress. What's important to realize is that everyone makes mistakes, even native speakers. It's part of learning and growing in any skill, including language.
And yet, many learners have this mental block. They fear the embarrassment or judgment that might come from saying something wrong. They may even avoid speaking altogether because of this fear.
Yes.
And this fear can create a vicious cycle. The more you fear making mistakes, the less you practice. And the less you practice, the harder it becomes to improve. It's like a mental barrier that keeps you stuck in the same place.
So, what can we do to overcome this fear? Well, the first thing is to shift your mindset. You need to reframe how you view mistakes. Instead of seeing them as failures, try seeing them as opportunities to learn.
Exactly. Every time you make a mistake, you're getting closer to mastering the language. Think of mistakes as stepping stones to fluency. In fact, many language experts say that the more mistakes you make, the faster you learn.
Here's something that might surprise you. Native speakers make mistakes too. We all do, even in our first language. So, when you make a mistake in English, it's nothing to be ashamed of. In fact, if you think about it, every mistake is a chance for growth.
That's so true. And I think one of the reasons people fear mistakes is because they don't want to sound incorrect in front of others. But the thing is, communication is about being understood, not about speaking perfectly. As long as your message gets across, you're succeeding.
Absolutely. And here's a great tip. Focus on the message rather than the language itself. If you're focused on conveying your idea clearly, you'll be less worried about whether every word is perfect. In fact, most listeners will focus on what you're saying, not how perfectly you say it.
Another way to get over this fear is to create a safe space for yourself to practice. This can be done in many ways: speaking with a language partner, practicing in front of a mirror, or even recording yourself. When you create a non-judgmental environment, you're less likely to feel embarrassed about making mistakes.
That's a good point, Sophie. And speaking of language partners, remember, the goal is to have a conversation, not a test. Most people you practice with will be understanding and supportive. After all, they were once learners too, and they know that mistakes are part of the process.
Exactly.
And here's another thing. Laughing at your mistakes can actually help reduce the fear. When you make a mistake, just laugh it off and keep going. It's all part of the journey, and not taking yourself too seriously will help you feel more relaxed while speaking.
And don't forget about self-compassion. We tend to be our harshest critics, but you need to be kind to yourself. Learning a language is hard work, and you're doing great by even trying. Give yourself credit for every step you take, no matter how small it may seem.
Exactly.
So, when you make a mistake, just remind yourself, I'm learning. This is part of the process. And remember, it's okay to not be perfect.
So, to wrap it up, the fear of making mistakes can be a huge barrier to speaking fluently, but it doesn't have to be. By shifting your mindset, focusing on communication, practicing in safe spaces, and embracing mistakes as learning opportunities, you'll reduce the fear and gain the confidence to speak more freely.
And as you overcome the fear, you'll start to notice that speaking becomes easier. It's all about practicing, making mistakes, and growing from them. But remember, it's a journey, and it's okay to take it one step at a time.
Now that we've tackled the fear of mistakes, let's move on to something that will help you practice your speaking skills more effectively: practice strategies. After all, practice is the key to making progress.
Speaking of practice, what are some strategies we can use to improve speaking without getting stuck or discouraged?
Great question. In the next section, we'll be diving into practical ways to practice speaking, and we've got some great tips that will help you move from understanding English to speaking it fluently. All right, We've talked about confidence and the fear of making mistakes, and now it's time to get into the real work of improving your speaking skills. So, let's talk about practice strategies, because, as we all know, practice makes perfect, or at least, it makes progress.
Exactly. It's one thing to know the theory about language learning, but the real key is practicing regularly in ways that challenge you and help you grow. So, Nathan, let's dive right in. What are some great strategies for practicing speaking English?
Well, one of the most effective ways to practice speaking is speaking as much as possible, even if it's just to yourself. I know it might sound weird, but the more you say the words, the more natural they'll feel.
That's a great point. One of my favorite techniques is shadowing. Shadowing is when you listen to a native speaker, whether it's in a podcast, a YouTube video, or a movie, and repeat what they say in real time. It helps with pronunciation, rhythm, and getting used to the flow of conversation.
Yes. Shadowing is an amazing exercise because it helps you practice speaking without the pressure of coming up with your own ideas right away. You're imitating the speaker, which allows you to focus on how they speak, not just the words they use.
Exactly. It's like learning by imitation. And you can shadow with any content, movies, TV shows, podcasts, or even news reports. Just make sure to choose content that's a bit challenging, but not too difficult. Start with short clips, then gradually increase the length.
Another great way to practice is by using language learning apps. There are plenty of apps like Duolingo, Babbel, or HelloTalk that allow you to practice speaking with voice recognition. These apps can be a fun and easy way to get more practice in, especially when you don't have someone to practice with.
That's right. Apps are fantastic for practicing vocabulary and phrases, but don't forget that you'll need real conversations to improve fluency. So, it's also important to find a language partner or a tutor to practice with regularly.
Yes. Practicing with someone else is key. You can join language exchange platforms like Tandem or Italki to connect with native speakers or other learners. You can set up regular speaking sessions where you talk about anything, your day, a hobby, or even practice specific topics.
And don't worry if you make mistakes during these conversations. A language partner or tutor will likely be supportive and patient. The goal is to practice, not to be perfect. And the more you do it, the easier it gets.
Exactly. And when you're practicing with a partner or tutor, try to set specific goals for each session. For example, focus on practicing certain phrases, grammar points, or even speaking about a specific topic.
Another fantastic strategy is recording yourself. This can feel a little uncomfortable at first, but it's incredibly effective. When you record yourself speaking, you can listen back and notice areas where you need improvement. Maybe your pronunciation is off, or you're repeating certain mistakes. It's like having your own personal coach.
That's so true. It also helps you become more aware of your speaking speed. A lot of learners tend to speak too quickly or too slowly because they're nervous, so recording yourself can give you insight into pacing.
Speaking of pacing, one of the things I love doing is role-playing. You can practice conversations in different situations, like ordering food at a restaurant, asking for directions, or making small talk at a party. This helps you get used to speaking in different contexts and builds your confidence.
Yes, role-playing is a great technique, especially if you don't have a language partner available. You can do it by yourself or with a friend. Pretend you're in a real-life situation and think about how you would respond. It's like putting yourself in a real-world scenario.
One more strategy I'd like to mention is thinking in English. At first, you may think in your native language and translate to English, but that can slow you down. Try to train your brain to think in English, even when you're just going about your day. If you're walking outside, think about the things around you in English. This will help you become more comfortable with spontaneous speaking.
That's such a great tip. It's all about creating that connection between your thoughts and the language. When you stop translating in your head, your responses will start coming faster and your fluency will improve.
Right, and don't forget to practice listening as much as you practice speaking. The better you can understand spoken English, the easier it will be to respond naturally when it's your turn to speak.
Exactly. Listening to native speakers helps you get familiar with the flow of the language, and it helps you pick up on new words and phrases. So, try to surround yourself with English as much as possible. Listen to podcasts, watch TV shows, or even change your phone's language settings to English.
And one last piece of advice: be consistent. It's better to practice for 15 minutes every day than to cram a whole hour once a week. Regular practice will help your brain get used to the language and make speaking feel more natural.
Definitely. Consistency is key. It's all about integrating English into your daily routine. Even small amounts of practice each day can lead to big improvements over time.
So, to summarize, great practice strategies include shadowing, using language apps, practicing with a language partner or tutor, recording yourself, role-playing, thinking in English, and of course, listening regularly. All of these strategies will help you speak more fluently and confidently.
That's right. But remember, it's not just about practicing hard, it's about practicing smart. Focus on real-life situations, challenge yourself, and don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Exactly.
And as you practice, you'll notice that speaking becomes less of a challenge and more of a natural part of your daily routine. So, don't stop. Keep practicing, and soon enough, you'll be speaking English fluently.
Now, as we wrap up today's episode, remember that the key to fluency is a combination of understanding the language, having the confidence to speak, overcoming the fear of making mistakes, and using the right practice strategies.
So, to conclude, if you're struggling to speak fluently, remember that it's completely normal. Understanding English and speaking it fluently require different skills, but by practicing regularly, building confidence, and embracing mistakes, you'll definitely make progress.
Exactly. Keep practicing, be kind to yourself, and celebrate every step you take on your language learning journey. You're doing great, and fluency will come with time.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope today's episode was helpful. If you have any questions or want to share your language learning experience, feel free to leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you.
And don't forget to subscribe for more tips and advice on learning English. We'll see you next time.